Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Stern, I know you're here doing the best you can and that you're trying to make everything better, but there's some real serious questions that I have related to a number of different things, but I'm going to start with the nut butter situation because we just touched on a couple of those. One, you were talking about having the mandatory authority. If you look at the time frame, which is attachment A in the OIG report, if you look at the timetable there on their chart, it's page 30 of what I have, but he may have something different. You all exercised or let them know that you might use mandatory on August 15th, and they voluntarily recalled on August 19th. So I think in response to Ms. DeGette's question, it clearly worked because you told them you were about to do it, and 4 days later they were like, okay, we'll do it voluntary. The problem I have is on two things that you said also in that regard. You said that part of the problem was the new technology, the whole genome sequencing. But when you look at the time chart, it raises all kinds of questions for me. So I want you to explain the whole genome in a minute, right. But here's the question I have. There was enough information that something was going on that you all opened up an investigation in February, late February. 6 weeks later, you actually, under using the older technology, matched an uncommon strain of salmonella to that facility. That was on March 24th, and connected it with some of the diseases, some of the folks who'd gotten sick. Nothing was done apparently at that point. There may have been some letters, I don't know. But then the whole genome sequencing was completed on May 12th. So the discussion that you want to make sure you're doing the right thing and not disrupting, as Ms. DeGette said earlier, an entire industry with a recall that's not justified, you had that confirmation on May 12th. So May 12th, June 12th, July 12th, right. August 12th, all went by. Eventually, 3 months and a few days later, you then threatened the mandatory recall. Right. So the question is that American people who are watching this either live or later when they're having insomnia are going to ask is, okay, we want to make sure we're doing the right thing. Maybe you can justify, although there's a question mark there, between March 24th and May 12th. But once you've got the whole genome sequencing, right. And there's no distinguishing between the salmonella in the sick people and in your environmental, and I know I'm not using the scientific terms, but the sick people and in the nut butter, why didn't you act then?
So there's a number of issues that make this complicated, so okay. If I could go back a little bit. So there was a link under the PFGE pattern in March of 2014. It's important to understand that a couple of things about that.
All right, now folks back home don't know because what is a PDGF?
This is pulse field gel electrophoresis, and it helps link the clinical, that is from the person, to what's happening at the facility. Right. It's something that we've used, been relying on for a while. It's not perfect because it's more limited in the amount of information that, in terms of comparison of those organisms. So, and it shows that there's a strong link between what those organisms actually are, because something like,
And that's what you linked up in March.
That's what we linked up in March. I will tell you that our expert analysis is that was not enough to show causation at that point.
Okay.
There was no link. And it was done differently than we usually do it. Usually there's a food history that links, where they ask people, what did you eat? And they link that back up. Then we look at the PFGE. That didn't happen in this case. People did something new in this case. They went through some of the data bank and they linked that up. They linked it up with PFGE and they linked it up with whole genome sequencing. And they're very excited about that when that happened, because it does, and it actually has been something that we've used that is linking up to this database, and it's something that really is very promising. But there were delays in this case, and I should say, first of all, I think we could have done better in this case. I will tell you that when we did the whole genome sequencing, we did it for the environmentals in May. It was not until August that we linked it to the clinicals. And that was a delay in terms of doing that whole genome sequencing link, which was the trigger for that request for mandatory recall and the discussions with the firm that resulted in recall. There were things that I think could have been done differently in this case, but I do think it's important to understand some of the complexities. This was not an obvious case on day one, and in fact, a number of these cases, it's not obvious on day one. It's very important that we accelerate our own investigation. It's important that firms have their own investigation and their own preventative models. But it was less than clear to the people who had that, back in March, because there were environmentals which were concerning, but the links to the clinicals were less than crystal clear. Like I said, it wasn't supported at that time by the food histories, and the firm tested all their product. All the product was negative. So, the firm was pushing back on us with some of their own testing. So the story is a little bit more complicated, but at the same time, we take the OIG's point in this, and we agree with it. We need to make sure it's not okay if it takes this long, even if it's complicated. That's why we have this approach in place, where we feel we need to make sure that the agency leadership and the staff are prepared to, know what's a red flag and act on it to make sure we get to the right result as soon as possible.
I appreciate it, and yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair will now